Okay. Welcome everyone to our Yom Hashoah Tekes tonight. We are very lucky to have Mrs. Eva Ozorowski with us to share her testimony, her story in a few moments. But we're going to start by lighting a Gister candle. For those of you who got a yellow candle through the shul, we are participating in a group of more than 20,000 people who will be lighting yellow candles tonight. And in each candle, there is the name of a person along with their town and their age of someone who was lost to us in the Holocaust. So I invite people to light their candles if they wish at the moment. And then if you feel comfortable sharing the name on your card, or if you have someone who is dear to you, a family member, someone that you know who was murdered in the Holocaust, please feel free to unmute yourself and share their name. And we will follow that up with a Kel Male for those people and all the people, all the 6 million souls who were lost in the Holocaust. If you'd like to share a name, please feel free to just unmute yourself and go ahead.
I'll do it. Edith Sundheimer Zemler, my son-in-law's great aunt.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share a name on a yellow card or someone near and dear to you?
Yes, I have Frederica Horowitz of Lvov, Poland.
Thank you.
And while I don't have a yellow card, I do want to add my paternal grandparents, Yosef Ozarovsky, my grandfather, who I'm named after, and my grandmother, Malka Reizel Ozarovsky.
I will add the families of my husband's grandparents, Luba and David Keller, all of their many, many siblings and parents.
I think we should remember all the people that we don't even know their name. I know on one side of my family that a whole bunch of people were from Kobrin, which I guess is now in Belarus. And that time it was in Poland. And cousin's daughter of mine did some research there, and basically they were all massacred. I don't know if it was Baba Yar or somewhere really big. And so these are it's a whole town that had a lot of Jews. It was like 60% Jewish, and they're all gone, and we don't even know their names, or at least I don't even know the names of my relatives. But most of the family stayed there, and it's been lost. My grandparents didn't tell it to my parents. My parents are gone. There's nobody to even ask, and I feel really bad.
Yes, definitely.
Similarly, I have my mother's first cousin. Her parents and siblings got out. They actually ended up in Siberia. But she was visiting an aunt and uncle at the time that they were given the warning that they had to leave immediately. And they had to make the horrible choice to leave without her. And she was killed, and I don't know her name. I was just texting my mom to see if I could get it. But yeah, that was another life that was taken.
Yeah. So hard not to know everyone's names. Naomi Sugar is adding via text, she adds the family of Rose Stern, our Bubby and survivor, and Abe Sugar, Sadie and survivor, and my grandfather's first wife, Sarah, and his whole family, the Shelcons. Thank you. Lynn and Sherwin. Let me find you. I will ask you to unmute. Let's see. While we work out Lynn's problem, Myra, if you want to go, please feel free.
Well, I'll add my great aunt, Sipila Rappaport, who apparently came to visit Toronto before the war, but went back and did not escape. And that was my father's sister. And then my father's mother, some of the family made it to South America. A lot did not survive, and I don't know any of their names of the people who did not survive, including my great grandmothers and great grandfather, I think, and I don't even know how many.
My mother just said she thinks her name was Lata, the cousin. So that's her last name.
You know, as so many of us with European roots, we had a lot of my mother's Romanian side did get out because this, I don't know if you know, Chicago is one of the biggest Jewish Romanian communities here. And my father's side was in Galicia, in Austria, in Poland, you know, and I'm actually pretty sure there are some still surviving relatives in Austria, but who knows what happened to anybody left behind. And as so many of you, I have no idea what their names are. You know, they're just lost. So, you know, keep them in my memory.
I mean, you know, the yellow candles provide us with names with no memory, no connection. And it's so beautiful to also hear about the connections for whom we have no names. So much was lost. So very much. So very much.
Go ahead. Show one of you.
Lynn and Sherwin, it's we're hearing some echo.
Okay. The name
I'm going to mute you because of the echo, but please feel free to put your names here in the chat as well. I see from Shelley, her step uncle's mother and sister, and some of her maternal grandmother's siblings. You can light the candle now, or you can wait until sundown, whichever you prefer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Wait. Now you can.
Okay, the name of the person that we have is, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing it, Etel Knecht of Noe Dwar, and he was murdered in 1943 at Auschwitz. And the only stories that we were told, I was told, about things happening is that my grandmother here used to send, as my mother would call them, bundles to a family that was in Poland. And it would take 3 weeks by boat to get there, and maybe 3 to 6 weeks after that to get a response. And after sending these quote unquote bundles to the family there, they weren't getting any responses from any of the packages. And when news started to leak out here of what was happening in Chicago here, my mother always said they started to put 2 and 2 together, and they came up with an answer they didn't want to know about. But it was, when my mother said it would be aunts and uncles and cousins that were there. I have to be honest, very fortunate that my grandparents came way before, and I feel very blessed, even though I had them a short time. Very blessed that I had grandparents.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Anyone else would like to share a name before we say our Kelmale?
Yes, I'd like to share the name of Hanan Leib Schwedek.
my husband Jonathan Wax. Was his maternal grandfather, his papa's brother, from the Ukraine. Papa could not get. He went back and forth and tried to get his family out, and they would not. They would not leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. Okay, I'm going to ask Alan to recite the Kalmale for all of the people who we have remembered, all of the names we have shared, and all of the millions that we are not able to remember or share today.
Yeah, I'll just add before I say the Kalmale, my grandfather, Emer Goldschmidt, who died in Forced Labor Battalion, my aunt, Fagi Burston, who died in Russia, and my great aunt, Lenka Weiss, and her son, Tibor, who died in Auschwitz. Okay. El Male Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Amitze Menucha Nechonal Kanfei Shechina, Bemalot Kedoshim Utahorim Kezoar Harakia Mashirim, Chol Nish.
You muted, Alan.
I don't know why I got muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Should I start over?
I think so. Yeah, okay. It was pretty early.
El Male Rachamim Shochin Bamromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Shechina, Bebalot Kedoshim Utahorim Kezoar Harakia Mashirim, Lechol Nishmot Sheshet Milyonei HaYehudim Chalelei HaShoah B'Europa Shenehergu Benishchetu Benisrifu Benisfu Al Kiddush Hashem Bidei Meratzchim HaGermanim Be'ozreihem Mishar Ha'amim Avur Shakal Notain Staka Ba'ad Haskarat Nishmotehem Began Eden Tehe Menuchatam Lachain Balarachmim Yastireim V'Seter Knafav Liolamim V'Yitzur HaChaim Et Nishmotehem Adonai hu nachlatam v'yanuchu b'shalom al mishkovotehem v'yamdu legoralam l'ketayim v'nomar amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Alan. We now are blessed to be able to transition to listening to Mrs. Eva Ozrowski. We know there are many stories of bravery and perseverance and survival to be celebrated. And we're so lucky to have Mrs. Ozrowski, who is the father of Rabbi Joe Ozrowski, mother of Rabbi Joe Ozrowski, and grandmother of Rafi Ozrowski, and such a beloved piece of our community here. Mrs. Ozrowski was a graduate of Harris Stowe College in St. Louis, and she lived there in the Jewish community for many years. She taught in the public school system. She served as the beloved president of the Base Abe Sisterhood for 18 years and was honored by the congregation in 2013. She has 2 children, Marla and Rabbi Joe, 6 grandchildren, and 19 great-grandchildren. Just a few days ago, she returned from Israel with Ashira and Rabbi Joe, where she had spent Pesach and attended the bat mitzvah of a great-granddaughter at the Alon Shvut Women's Tefillah group. There were 4 generations of Ozrowskis dancing around the bima. She currently lives in Winston Towers and considers it her current life's mission to speak about her experiences. And I think that if there is any way to say we have overcome and persevered, it is to picture 4 generations of Ozrowski women dancing on the bima. So thank you for coming. Thank you for making this your life's mission. I know that I speak for all of us by saying we will take your story with us, and we look forward to listening. So I will turn the floor over to you guys.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbanit Yael. I'm going to get our time started here. We're grateful to be here. We're grateful to Skokie Valley for having us and for hosting this event. And the way we agreed to do this is for me to interview my mother. And I came up with a series of questions that will sort of guide us through the next half hour or so. You heard some of what the biography of my mother from Rabbanit Yael. I should mention that tomorrow my mom and I are driving to St. Louis, Missouri, the ancestral home of me and where my mom lived for 70 years, most of that with my dad, where she's being featured in the Epstein Hebrew Academy's Names, Not Numbers film that their 12th graders developed. And we're going to be back on Tuesday. On Wednesday night, she's going to be in the same production at Hillel Torah. So this is a busy week for Ivo Zarowski, but she was happy to be here and be with us. So let's go back to the beginning. My mom was born in 1930 in Warsaw, Poland. Shortly when she was an infant, her father, and I'm going to show you the picture of her parents. This is she was more than an infant in this picture. You can see what they looked like. Only child. When she was an infant, her father ended up in Lisbon, Portugal. And while the reasons are a bit murky, the family oral tradition suggests that he was trying to get to Brazil and the money ran out. And eventually, at some point, when he was a watchmaker and he opened up practice, and eventually he sent for my grandmother and my mother.
It took him 3 years.
3 years.
Save enough money.
Yep. So my mother's memories begin actually in Lisbon rather than in Warsaw, but Lisbon was how she escaped the Holocaust, and she's going to tell you that story. So here's the first question, Mom. What was it like growing up as a Jewish child in Lisbon? Did you have Jewish friends, Jewish education? What was Jewish life like? What can you share with us?
We lived in an old section of Lisbon, and there were no Jews around there. I would say almost everybody in the neighborhood wouldn't know what a Jew was to begin with. We had one neighbor, a naval officer. I think he knew, he understood, but it was never mentioned in any way whatsoever. I knew I was Jewish, but we never talked about it. I had no Jewish education at all. I had a Catholic education in the schools, not by nuns, public schools, but you got the Catholicism there. I learned the catechism. I learned how to cross myself properly and that kind of stuff. Education was only 4 years, public education. After that, if your parents had money, because it cost, you could go to what they called a liceo, secondary school.
Go ahead.
And that meant it was a 7-year program, very intensive. And my parents felt education was important, and I went to liceo. In the public school, I would guess my teacher, we had the same teacher for all the years we were in that 4-year school. I would guess based on a history lesson that we had when we got to the time of the Inquisition. And for the first time, she said something, because in those days, history was read and regurgitate, no discussion whatsoever. And when we got in the Inquisition, the teacher mentioned this was the stupidest thing our government had ever done. We lost our scientists, we lost our so many brains, so many artists, so many everything. And our government is the poorer for it. When I came home and I mentioned it to my parents, my father says, she must have Marrano blood and she knows it. She was a good Catholic. So basically, well, I'll tell you, though, when I finished the 4 years, my parents sent me to Liceo. There, I understand, the principal was the only one who knew that I was Jewish, and it was kind of under lock and key. I don't know how it worked out. I didn't have to take the Catholicism lessons anymore, but I participated in everything else. Interestingly enough, the first year of Liceo, when Christmas came, Joe was laughing. We saved money and we collected it, and the money was spent on layettes for poor children. The cardinal, the patriarch cardinal, because Portugal had was so Catholic, so strongly Catholic, such a small country, and they had two cardinals. The main one, the patriarch, was in Lisbon, and the regular cardinal was in Porto, the second largest city. And he came to accept our gift for the poor people. He sat in this huge room that we congregated in, and his royal cardinal's chair, and we lined up and we walked in line, and each one of us, when we got to him, we kneeled and kissed his ring. And I did the same. So you want to add something to that?
I'm going to ask a follow-up question, then we go to the next question. In addition to the Catholic upbringing, Portugal was a fascist country.
And how?
And how? Shelley Shapiro asked, when did you go? It was to Portugal. It was early on. It was 1933 to answer that question. It was in the chat. You were involved in a fascist youth group, weren't you?
Oh, yes. It was called the Portuguese Youth.
Right here. Isn't this it?
No. This is
No, there. Yeah, you got it out already.
And it was modeled after the Hitler Jugend. Portuguese youth, Hitler Jugend. Youth and Jugend are the same word. And this is my little, can you see? This is my little pin showing that I was member number, whatever it is. It's not a very high number. This was at the beginning. When I got to Liceu, then I was not allowed to keep up with the Portuguese youth because I was not a citizen. I was an alien.
As Polish refugees, they didn't give you citizenship there. Do you have any memories of Jewish life in Portugal as a child? Observance, kosher food, the synagogue?
Well, kosher food, I'll tell you one interesting one. My mother and I were going to the downtown area. She needed to pick up some stuff for my father, some things for taking care of the watches. And we went through a shortcut, and we passed through a huge market, 3-4 blocks square. And as we're almost at the end, I hear someone hollering, Madamazinha, Madamazinha. My mother turns around, and there's this guy in a white apron that's all bloodied up saying, Madamazinha. By the way, Madamazinha is short for Madame. My mother wasn't the tallest person in the world, and saying Madamazinha was like an honorary term for her. It didn't mean anything bad. And he says, Madamazinha, I have that Polish chicken with a blue seal today. Don't you need any? Have you figured out what the blue seal meant? The shoichet had been there, and we had kosher chicken. But the money she had to go for my father's watch supplies. We didn't have enough money for chicken also. So she thanked him very much, but not today.
So there was an availability of kosher food in limited fashion, and it was kept kind of under wraps, like a lot of Jewish life there was.
And by the way, may I mention, since Pesach just passed, we got the first English word I learned was manishevitz. It came, of course, on the package of matzahs that we got. It had to be ordered way ahead of time. And of course, it came from the United States, just the basics. But being a Mediterranean country, we had what's now called a Mediterranean diet, mostly fruits and vegetables and grains and
fish
and lentils and beans and stuff like that. And of course, fish.
Yep. Did you experience any anti-Semitism when you were growing up in Portugal?
No, I can't say that I did. In fact, I'll tell you an interesting story that goes with it. I don't know what day of the week it was, but we were getting all dressed, and I knew we were going to synagogue. So we walked downstairs. My father checks. Incidentally, we lived in the 7th floor apartment across from the store. We walk across the street. He checks the shutters to make sure everything is still tight. And we start walking down the street. It was not a Sunday because Sunday the stores were closed. And there are 2 shopkeepers already outside. So It was almost time to open up stores, and they're talking to each other. And as we pass by, one says to the other, "Today must be a Polish Saints' Day. You know, Poles are good Catholics, and they're Polish." With that, I feel my hands being squeezed by my father, and him muttering under his breath the equivalent of "keep your mouth shut."
Don't say a word. Keep it under wraps.
That's right. So in our neighborhood, they did not know we were Jews. The only person who might have guessed was this naval officer who lived below us.
You and your father, my grandfather, whose yard site, by the way, is tonight. I'll be saying Kaddish for him this evening.
I have the candle
and
ready.
The candle, we saying Kaddish for him. You've often used the terms living like quasi-Marranos or something close to that.
I use the term Marranos, period.
Yeah.
Because whatever we did in the house was not known. I'll give you another example. I didn't know at the time what it was, but my father takes me aside and he says, "I'm going to teach you something, and we're going to have people coming over for an evening for dinner, and you are going to say this at the dinner." So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, all these people, I know who some of them are, but they're all going to be talking. I'm going to be lonely. So I asked, could I please have the little girl across the hall from us? I played with her on the landing. Since we're on the 7th floor, the landing was very bright. We got a lot of sunshine. And my father says, "No, no, you can't. And you mustn't even say a word to her about it." I didn't know the parents well. They never came into our house. We never went to their apartment.
And what was this dinner like? What was dinner supposed to be?
Ma nishtana halayla.
You get it, yes.
Only we started differently. Tatashi, weil da fragen vier kashes. Ma favos, die dozige Nacht von Pesach, etc.
There was a question in the chat. If you can answer it very quickly, because I'm going to go on to the next segment in the limited time that we have. But one of the folks in the chat asked, did people in the neighborhood ask why your family didn't go to church?
Interesting, no. There wasn't a church exactly nearby. They just assumed whatever church they went to, we went to a different parish.
Okay. Nice Polish people go to their own parish. Now, as you were growing up as a child in the 30s, the clouds of war and the clouds of persecution were beginning to get darker and loom in Europe at the time as things were going on. Did you hear anything about what was going on in Poland with your family?
Yes, but first I have to explain to you that I was a good reader and I read the newspaper and I knew about the Spanish Civil War and I knew some of the horrible things that happened. But in general, the Portuguese press was censored. So obviously we didn't hear everything. I knew there was a war, and during war things are always very hard. But a lot of other things that were happening, they mentioned a concentration camp, but in a way, well, people were just sent to be together somewhere else. So from the paper, I didn't get the horrible stuff that was happening.
You've mentioned over the years your father did share some things with you. What did Grandpa tell you?
Well, what happened though is when they wanted to send me away, when the occasion came, and that's part of the story, we may go into it later, I cried bitter tears. I didn't want to go away. I didn't feel anything bad in Portugal. But they were worried. My parents were getting postcards begging for help. Only one postcard per family once a month, and only one member of the family could write a postcard. On my father's side, it was an uncle. His father passed away about a year and a half or so after I got to Portugal. So I lost my grandfather.
What was on the postcards? What what was shared, what was kind of quasi encoded? What did you read? What did you hear?
They couldn't tell much, but they did beg for food. They did beg for food. But one of my mother's brothers also asked for other stuff to be sent, which later on my father told me they probably could use that to sell on the black market and get better stuff for themselves.
And you've mentioned, I'm not sure if it's the card we have here or a different card, about how your family hinted at the death of certain relatives.
Yes, I just mentioned that my grandfather passed away after I got to Portugal, about a year and a half or so. So on my father's side, it was an uncle who was writing, also begging for food and so on. And he always entered the postcard, regards from your sister Golda. My father had one sister. Several postcards later, regards from your sister Golda and Ir Gemal and her husband. So obviously she was married. She got married. Several postcards, I don't know when later, and this is one postcard, unfortunately, that was lost in the flood that I had in St. Louis with many other papers. And this postcard said, "Your sister has gone to visit your father." Figure that one out.
So clearly, your father and your mother vicariously knew some of the things were going on in Europe. He had certain political connections that also let him know.
Yep. And those political connections, if the police got a hold of them, we would be in trouble, and they would be in trouble.
They were communists and socialists, as I recall.
Well, mainly socialists.
Mainly socialists, yeah.
Who knows? They could have been communists too, but mainly what I know from them.
He told me they were communists and socialists, so
okay,
that's probably who they are. So, what plans did your father make for you? You mentioned that earlier. Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Well, the plans didn't come as planned, or whatever plans. One thing that I learned later is that if the Nazis invaded, friends of my father would come for a visit, and I'd go back for a walk with them. That I would disappear somewhere with false papers being made. My parents couldn't have been helped in that way. Maybe, who knows? But at least for their child, they tried. Later on, a group came to Lisbon because, yes, yeah. In America, there was a group called Americans Society. Wait a minute. United States Committee for Saving Children. I have the one that comes after. Yeah. And they raise money in the United States. But what do you do with the money to save children? Well, there were 3 organizations helping people in Europe, not necessarily Jews only. The American Red Cross, Unitarian Church Service, and the Quakers, also known as Society of Friends. This committee then changed its name, United States Committee to Save European Children, and the money was given to the Quakers. Go to Europe and get kids out. So they went by boat.
You can mention who the 2 top names on the stationery were.
Absolutely, that's fun. Mrs. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was honorary chairperson. And there's several other names, but I'll just mention one.
President.
The president, a member of the board, was Marshall Field.
There really was such a person.
When I first started talking, people asked me, "You mean really? There really was such a person?" Yes, there was. So this committee gave the money to the Quakers, who took a boat. In those days, one didn't fly just for anything. And they went to France. The Nazis did not allow them to land. So from France, they went back. The boat made its way down through all the way down Bay of Biscay, and down to Lisbon, Portugal, the next open port. They went straight to the little Jewish community, explained what they were doing, and asked for them to call a meeting. My father was called a meeting, and I was told that he was the first one to sign someone up, me. So he came home, talked to my mother. I didn't hear anything. If she was crying, I heard not a thing. But obviously, she knew what was going on. And if they're willing to send me away with some Portuguese family, they were willing to take this chance. And my mother started preparing me, packing certain things, explaining things. My father told me other things, how I would go and I would be placed with a family. I would call them uncle and aunt.
How old were you?
At this time, I was 11. I cried bitter tears. Things were still good in Portugal, but we're together here and everything. But my father said, finally, after a lot of tears, my father left me a pamphlet that he had gotten from his liberal friends. And as I said before, if the police had gotten hold of that, they'd all be in trouble. The pamphlet had a title, A Ceifa do Crime, The Reaping of the Crime. That's hard to understand. And I was a good reader. I don't remember it all, but some things stick to my mind where they said, and bodies were thrown into lime pits. This hit me hard. It was bodies. That means people were dying. What's going on here? And after that, I didn't argue too much. And my mother stood in front of me and said, we don't know what's going to be. One of us must live. You're it. So I shut up completely. And they started preparing me to go to the United States of America. You've got something to ask?
No, I was going to go. So they sent you on the boat. Did you have any sense that the war was going on while you were on the boat on the Atlantic Ocean?
Yes. Since I had read on the paper, so I knew about the war and I knew many of the things that were happening. But on the boat, we saw U-boats underneath, and we saw Luftwaffe on top, Luftwaffe. So we knew that was going on. And I had read that sometimes the Luftwaffe even bombed neutral ships. Anything could have happened. We were a neutral boat, a Portuguese boat. On the boat, we were treated royally by the Portuguese crew. Every night, we went second class. Every night we'd be in the main ballroom. There would be dancing. The crew took us around. We learned how to conga. Oh, that was the signal. It was time to go to bed. You had the conga line, and they straight to where you went down to your rooms. And we learned to play games. I learned how to play cards. They really tried to make us be in a good mood. In many ways, they succeeded. But other times when we were alone, yes, our thoughts were a little different. My parents.
So we've got a few minutes left. You ended up in the U.S. first, I believe, in New York, and you ended up.
No, it's supposed to be New York.
Philadelphia, right?
New York Harbor was mined. Subs or had U-boats were seen in Long Island Sound. So we went to Philadelphia instead, took a train to New York, and stayed in a place where they took good care of us. To get our meals, we had to get dressed, sometimes put the new galoshes that we had never used in Portugal, and go across. It was like a park, like to a different building where we had our meals 3 times a day. You have something to say?
Well, I want to come to the next part of it because we only got a few minutes left. You ended up in St. Louis, Missouri, which is where you settled. It's where I was born and raised as my sister.
I do want to mention that they asked me what kind of family I would like, the social worker. I said one with children, and I was placed with the Levies, Israel and Lena Levy, who had two little boys, a 4-year-old Richard, who in those days was Dickie, and a 6-year-old Stanley, whom we called Spike. The little one and I bonded immediately. And the older one softened up when I learned English and he found out I could tell bedtime stories.
You must have missed your parents terribly, even though you were a
Very
nice
much
family.
so. My dreams were, I had a weird dream that I was flying over the ocean and I'd get to Portugal, but I couldn't go down. I could just see them.
How did your parents make it out of Europe?
Well, my foster father wanted to bring him over. He wanted to be a sponsor.
This was after the war.
After the war, when my parents wanted to make arrangements for me to come back to Portugal, which they were told would be a problem since they were not citizens and I was not a citizen. So my foster father wanted to make the sponsorship, but his lawyer told me he had no clout and the lawyer had no clout. And I remember that was someone in Portugal, Mr. Bachmann, who was an importer of Swiss watches, and he had come to America several years before with his wife and family and established himself. So after this, and my foster father says, if you think of anything that can help, let me know. They must have thought very highly of me, but what am I going to think? But I remember Mr. Bachman, and I wrote a letter to him asking if he had any ideas that would help my foster father. And he sent me back a letter saying, unfortunately, he'd already made so many sponsorships, he was afraid that the State Department looked crooked at him. But don't worry, my lawyer will be in touch with you. Next thing I know, a week later, I have a fat envelope from the lawyer. He is sponsoring my parents on Mr. Bachman's word. And so it happened. This happened when I was in a junior in high school. And when I was a senior, I made high school in 3.5 years. I got out as fast as I could. When I was in my senior year, 6 months later, my parents were arranged to come. They missed my graduation by a little over a month.
We could probably go on for a long time, and the stories are so amazing. I've grown up with these stories, but there are two more questions I want to focus on in the remaining time that we have. I want to talk about how you met my father, and just to mention as a point of introduction here. So my father, Shalom, was born in Stopnitz, Poland, which is where the Sugar family, Abe Sugar, who's mentioned in the chats, came from as well. There's Sugar on this call right now. He was in Lodz during the war. The family was in the Lodz ghetto for 5 or 6 years, and my father was in the camps for another year, and then he was in the DP camps for about 4 years and eventually ended up in 1949 in Belleville, Illinois. It's another story which we're not going to tell today. But how did you meet my father?
Well, this was just before Labor Day, and B'nai Brit in St. Louis always made a big fundraising project at a park, Westlake Park in Creve Coeur. It was fundraising. It was a 3-day affair. So my father says, Havala, take us to the Jewish picnic. So we walked down 3 blocks and got on a streetcar and went to this Jewish picnic. So it's very nice. A lot of people were there, a lot of things going on. And my father and mother found friends that they knew. Half of them are Grina, if you know the term, refugees like them. So we're sitting there late afternoon, talking, chatting. And all of a sudden, my father stopped and says, excuse me, see that young man there? It's an Eigene. He's one of us. Tata, what are you talking about? Excuse me, please. He gets up, walks around, and starts talking to this young man. And a few moments later, brings him over to the crowd and introduces him as Oscar Ozorowski, who has just arrived in the United States about maybe 10 days ago. I don't have the exact timing. Still doesn't know any English. And the social worker met him at Union Station, and from St. Louis took him to Belleville, Illinois. And without knowing English, it's a whole story the way he made it to the picnic. He looked around when he got off the bus from Belleville, and he heard some women talking in German, so he went over to them. He didn't know a thing about it. She didn't know a thing about a Jewish picnic, but they gave him directions to the Y, to the J, which is, at that time was the Y. So he got there. He goes in and he asks about the Jewish picnic. Oh, you're unlocked. Follow those guys there. The truck is going out there. So there was a truck full of young men and sitting in those. Today it wouldn't be allowed. All those in the truck. And that's how he got to the Jewish picnic. So we took him home that night. My mother made a meal. She could make a meal out of nothing very fast. And after the meal, my father and I took him down to the bus station and put him on the bus to Belleville. Now Rosh Hashanah is coming. So my father says, Chavala, sit down and write a postcard to Jewish Family and Children's Service of Belleville, asking them to relay to this young man, Oscar Ozorowski, we'd like to invite him for Rosh Hashanah. Tatashi, I complained. There's no such thing as Jewish family in Belleville. They're too small. My father was an action. Chavala, write. Chavala wrote, and sure enough, Oscar Ozorowski showed up for Rosh Hashanah. We were living in back of a store. The kitchen had been carved out of the back of the store, and then you had a couple of steps up. You had 2 rooms and a bathroom. My mother insisted on having a dining room, and my bed was also in the dining room, like a sofa cot bed, which my foster father brought over when we moved in. Until they were able to get a place to stay, I lived with my foster parents. And then a big room that was a bedroom, and of course the bathroom. So my mother made up the bed for Oscar with all the bedclothes she had brought from Poland, and this was on the floor, and he slept in the same room with them. And we went, and the store was in an old neighborhood, Midtown St. Louis, that had been very Jewish for quite a while. I met several kids in high school who told me they had gone to my school because the school was segregated, that the neighborhood was changing. If I had come a few years earlier, there were a lot of young people there. But now it was changing. But the little shul was still there. It was run by a man we called Old Mr. Katz, who incidentally taught my oldest foster brother, and we had the bar mitzvah in that shul. So that's where we went for Yom Tov. And then after Yom Tov, we put my husband back on the bus.
He wasn't your husband yet, but yes.
He became my husband. And a year, let's see, this is what, 1949, Rosh Hashanah, etc. A year later, December the 10th, 1950, we were married.
And the rest is history. There was a question on there from Naomi Sugar, and I don't want to spend, I have a final question for my mother, but I want to note that Abe Sugar, Shalom, Yerzeda, was from the same town in Poland that my father was from, Stopnitz, Poland, and my father actually remembered him. When I mentioned it, he said, oh yeah, Zucker, he remembered him. So there's a connection there. One last question for you, Mom. How did your experiences that you so eloquently shared with us now, and we could go on and on, but we can't, unfortunately. We have a time limitation. But these amazing experiences, how did they affect you through the rest of your life as a Jewish woman, as a wife, as a mother? What did you take with you?
As a Jewish woman, through the years, I wanted what I had not had in Portugal. I did not have a Jewish education. And I did a lot of learning on my own, and I'm still learning. As a mother, my mother was a kind person. I learned to be kind. Neither of my parents spanked. So And amazingly, my husband was not a spanker, despite the fact that as a child, he was threatened when his father, that's a different story. He married and he was going to learn for a few years and to go into family business, which was lumber. And then the lumber yard burnt down and he had to make a living for the family. He went to a different town and started teaching. A Malamed. So he only came back for, it's like the Shalom Aleichem stories. He came back for Yom Tovim, not for Shabbos. And that he was threatened. Oi, when he got in trouble, wait till your father comes. And the poor kid was being spanked and he didn't remember why. But he never put a hand on his children. He'll tell you.
True. True.
And neither did I. One time, my Malki, my daughter, was unusually sassy. I mean, it was so bad that I gave her a slap. And then I go, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Maidel. I'm sorry, my sweet Maidel. Well, I mentioned this to her a few years ago, and she says, I don't remember it.
You were amazing parents, wonderful parents, role models for my sister and for me. You also mentioned Jewish education. How did you follow through with that?
I sent them to the Epstein Hebrew Academy because I wanted them to have what I had not had. So they were both graduates, Epstein Hebrew Academy. And then Yosala afterwards continued by coming.
Yosala is me.
He's still Yosala. Continued after junior high. He came to Chicago to what is now Fassman High School. It was just Chicago Yeshiva at the time.
So you gave us the Jewish education, and Dad supported that totally. Your experiences also informed your involvement, your personal involvement in Jewish life, which I didn't see that much when I was younger. But after we left the house, you became this major figure in the St. Louis Jewish community.
Well, I went to shul, and the person who really influenced me a lot was Rabbi Abraham McGenzie, who was also a refugee. He had gone in the opposite direction to Russia and so on. And he encouraged me. And when the opportunity arose that the sisterhood president passed away, he got the women to vote me in as president. And then he put me in charge of the kitchen. Next thing I knew, she said, can you arrange the kitchen so we can serve milchiks as well as fleischiks? So I did a whole rearrangement of the kitchen, the way I would do a home, but in a larger scale. And yes, and I trained the maintenance guy on cleaning the stove and taking care of the way things had to be taken care of.
Mom, you've always been a role model for us, and we are just so grateful that you shared your experiences with us, that you were so frank and honest and communicative, and just thank you so, so much. You and I have had these conversations many times over many years, including some in this framework, and I can tell you I never tire of hearing these stories and of talking to you and listening to you, so thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'd like to add and to echo to say I feel like we could have sat here for many, many more hours listening to your stories. And I hope that we'll have a chance in years to come. And also to know that when you see Mrs. Ostrowski at Kiddush, you can go up and say hello and hear her stories as well. So we're very, very grateful. Thank you for the emotional energy, for the time to prepare, for telling your story, and for all of your bravery and getting to this point today, where you could dance with your great granddaughter at her bat mitzvah. Thank you to everyone for coming and for joining us. Thank you to those who had yellow candles. I posted a way you can join in the 20,000 by tagging the shul and the yellow candle project to help raise awareness about Yom HaShoah this year. In some ways, feels important in a different way. in this current climate. I hope that everyone has a day that is meaningful and important tomorrow. And thank you, Mrs. Ostrowski, again. If anyone has any last thoughts, they're welcome to post them in the chat before we sign off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We would come back and we could ask you some more questions, because this is absolutely fascinating and is history that should not be lost.
Amen.
Amen.
And it has been recorded, so anyone who would like to share it, it will be on our YouTube station later.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you again, Mrs. Ostrowski. Thank you, Rabbi Ostrowski, for taking the time to help tell the story in such a beautiful way. And we'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.